Welcome everyone, my name is Kirill, I'm a backend and infrastructure engineer, and 2 days ago my colleague and I were given a workshop about Kubernetes at work. This topic is really interesting, and there are many people who actually heard about this technology a lot of times but never tried it hands-on. I intend to create a set of rather short videos where I will guide you through the process of creating your first Kubernetes cluster, managing it, deploying it, and so on. You may think, what the reason, dude? There are tons of materials about Kubernetes out there in the internet. Yeah, might be, but different people perceive information in different way. And maybe exactly for you, this video or these videos will be the perfect shape of how this information can be given. In this first video, I will just introduce you to the first basic concepts of Kubernetes. In the further videos, there will be more hands-on stuff. Without further ado, let's start with the presentation. In just a few words, Kubernetes can be described as open source container orchestration system. Now let's try to understand what it actually means. Most likely, if you came across this video, you already know what container is. However, just for the common understanding, I will give a brief explanation. Containerization is a technique similar to virtualization. Sometimes it's called operation system level virtualization, and container is artifact of this virtualization type. In this type of virtualization, containers share the host's operating system kernel. So that's why it's not possible, for example, to run Linux on Windows machine or Windows on Linux machine with pure containerization technique. It is still possible, but in this case, some real virtual machine should be added between them. However, the main idea of container is that it provides you environment isolation. If you have, let's say, two containers running on the same host machine, application running in one of those containers will not be able to see neither file system nor processes of the second container. By the way, you can still somehow share the file system. You can mount the same folder, but by default it's not the case. And most likely you heard about Docker. Docker is just one of possible tools which provide you containerization. It is not the only one, and it is not the first. It is just one which is popular nowadays. And because of that, we will be using Docker as an example in our future hands-on part. Another important part to understand is what cluster is. Cluster is usually a group of machines, of virtual machines or of physical servers or just some computational instances. And now Kubernetes. As already had been mentioned, Kubernetes is a container orchestration tool. What does it mean? It means that you help you to manage, to scale, deploy your applications which are provided as a containers. So you ship your application as a container, and Kubernetes help you with managing all the following parts. And Kubernetes is not in one tool, Kubernetes is rather a set of different tools. Initially it had been designed by Google, and currently it is owned and driven by Cloud Native Computing Foundation. As I already mentioned before, Docker is not the only tool for containerization, and Kubernetes works with Docker, but also it works with other tools. One more thing to know about Kubernetes is that it is pretty complex. Maybe if you want to use it in production, maybe if you don't have any experience with it and you want to manage it and you want to start using it in production right away, maybe it's not the best tool. Maybe you can look towards, let's say, AWS ECS, which abstracts many parts of container orchestration and helps you to get started, helps you to start running your application in the cluster in the cloud. Kubernetes is very flexible, but you will have to think about many parts. You'll have to think about security, about networking, about automation. It doesn't mean that it's bad. It is definitely worth learning it, worth getting familiar with it, and if you already have Kubernetes somewhere in your infrastructure, I hope this video will help you to start understanding it. In these videos, we will be using Google Cloud to manage Kubernetes cluster. It is not necessary that you will be using Google Cloud in your production environment. it may be AWS EKS, it may be just a pure cluster of computational machines, it can be pure cluster of EC2 machines or some physical machines or virtual machines. The reason we will be using Google Cloud here is that it provides us some level of configuration. Some things are pre-configured for us, predefined, which helps it way easier to start working with Kubernetes. Now, there are a few keywords which most likely you will need to learn to understand the basics. And first three of them are node, pod, and container. We already got familiar with containers. It is a part of your application which is running in isolation. And in this picture of Russian dolls, container is the smallest one. The next one, bigger, is a pod. Pod may consist of one container or multiple containers. It may have some volumes attached to it, and it usually has an IP address. And the biggest Russian doll here is node. Node is your cluster instance. So, for instance, it's just a part of your cluster. It can be a virtual machine or a physical machine. And this is a node. In this illustration, you may see that, as I told you before, pod can have one container, multiple containers, some volumes attached to it, and it has IP address. This IP address is not public. It is visible only within the cluster. Two more important keywords are deployment and service. And deployment is sort of a description of your desired state. You state there what do you want to see in your cluster, what type of pods should be there, how many instances do you want to run. And also deployment helps you to manage the self-healing. If some of your pod goes down, it will be spinned up, another container, another pod will be spinned up. And if, for example, you want to manually increase the amount of replicas you run from 3 to 5, you just change the number in the deployment configuration, apply it, and 2 more pods will automatically be spinned up for you. Service is a bit different thing. Service is an abstraction layer on top of this set of pods. Usually you don't communicate with pods directly. Let's say from the outside you don't call specific pod because they don't have IP address, external IP address. What do? You communicate with a service. And one example of service can be load balancer. Load balancer has external IP address, it knows the IP addresses of your pods. So you communicate with your load balancer service, and it, in its turn, communicates with your pods. This will be enough to start. Just to recap these words: cluster, node, pod, container, deployment, and service. So they are divided by 2 groups because they serve different purposes. Thank you for being here. The next video will be released shortly, and there I will actually guide you through the hands-on part. We'll create our first cluster, we will deploy our first application. So much more fascinating than just theoretical explanations. Stay tuned, don't forget to subscribe, and have fun! Hey, who's out there?